Conservatives like to call liberals snowflakes, but they're outraged about everything. I mean, come on, guys, grow up, put on a damn mask, and keep us all healthy. Check this out, leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel.
While I do agree that conservatives often complain about a lot of stupid shit, they do so to a far lower extent than the liberals. And a lot of the stuff they do complain about is legitimate, like being forced to wear a fucking face diaper in the July heat just to do business with anybody. If you want groceries but don't have a mask, you're SOL.
The Supreme Court this morning said to Louisiana, back in 2016, we told Texas that you couldn't shut down abortion clinics because their doctors didn't have admitting privileges from local hospitals, something that, by the way, other surgical practices don't typically have to have, including surgical practices that have much higher risk levels, like things like, dentists. So, today they said, no, sorry, and John Roberts was the swing vote, which has got conservatives pulling their hair out. And, of course, predictably, Brett Kavanaugh, Biff, voted to end abortion in Louisiana. Susan Collins is right now thinking about writing a stern note to him.
And what, pray tell, may that letter say? Dear Mr. Kavanaugh, how dare you not believe women should be able to murder their children just because they haven't been born yet?
But so we got that story, but there was a much bigger story that got no coverage at all. Supreme Court story from this morning, and that is that the Supreme Court said that Elizabeth Warren's brainchild, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that their structure, because the president can't directly fire the chief executive of this agency, that structure is unconstitutional. Now, they didn't end the agency, but, the law does have to be changed, or something has to be changed with regard to this. I haven't read the decision yet. But this is the agency that has recovered from banksters in America $12 billion that was fraudulently taken from people like you and me by our banks and returned the money to us, which is why Republicans hate it.
Which is why I think we ought to privatize that agency. Think about it. If we had private companies whose responsibility was to protect consumers from fraudulent banking, which is the type of service there'd be demand for with or without government, there's not a thing the Republicans could do to stop them. If this Consumer Protection Agency was privatized, then there would be quite literally no way Donald Trump could force his way into being in charge of it.
So the Supreme Court, maybe they're getting a little bit liberal on social issues, in quotes. We'll give you a little tiny victory on DACA. We'll tell you how to blow it up, but here you go. We'll protect trans rights. But when it comes to money, when it comes to the billionaires who pay for the Federalist Society, who help create the Federalist Society, who pay, who provide venues and platforms and nice side gigs for conservative judges and lawyers and lobbyists and screw the idea of bipartisanship or anything else.
Well, first of all, it's hardly just conservatives who do this. I mean, there are plenty of left-wing special interest groups that do quite a bit of lobbying and influencing as well. But second of all, and this is my main point here, have you ever heard of the definition of insanity, Tom? You seem to understand that government is easily corrupted, easily influenced, and this is a problem that's been going on for a long time with both parties. Instead of finding less corrupt alternatives to government to help deal with society's problems, you keep insisting on using government. It's like the writing is on the wall. This institution is corrupt, easily influenced, cares about the interests of the wealthy and not you. Time and time again, you go crawling back to it for the answers to all your problems.
There's one other thing I want to point out, and I think that this is worth discussing, and that's the phony outrage of conservatives. And the question I'm asking in this context is, what do you think is going to be next?
Well, I'm not one to agree with conservatives on everything. I will say that their outrage strikes me as typically more genuine than the outrage on the left. For example, leftists are constantly outraged about the less fortunate in this country, but instead of donating their own money, they insist the government take yours by force. They also constantly complain about the cost and availability of healthcare in this country, but don't take the time to consider the possibility that the cost and availability of healthcare in this country is due to the very government that they're kissing up to deal with it.
I mean, right now they're all about masks.
So nobody's against the masks themselves. Obviously, if you feel that wearing a mask is good for your safety or the safety of those around you, by all means wear one. What's controversial regarding the masks is that people want to force people who don't want to wear them to wear them.
Right? Oh my God, they're making us wear masks. It's an infringement on my civil rights.
Well, I mean, it kind of is. Because you own your body, you have the right to decide what goes on your body. You have a right to decide what to wear. For someone else to force you to wear something against your will is a claim to your body. And if somebody else owns your body, then that's slavery.
Go over to rawstory.com or basically any progressive website, and you'll find video after video after video of these so-called Karens and Chads.
You know, I always thought it was funny how liberals accuse conservatives of making wearing a mask a political issue when they're the ones coming up with condescending labels to use against people who just want to decide what to put on their own goddamn face.
I think they should be called, Ivankas and Donalds, frankly.
Godwin's Law Part B. The longer a progressive talks about a political issue, the more likely it becomes that they'll take a jab at Donald Trump, regardless of how relevant it is to the matter at hand.
Entitled white people, selfish entitled white people.
You racist bastard.
What does that have to do with any of this? I mean, I think it's wrong to force people to wear something against their will regardless of skin color. I'm not sure why you decided to bring white people into this. It would be like if I was making a video criticizing bank bailouts and all of a sudden I was like, you know who owns most of the banks? Jewish people. I mean, it's just racist and irrelevant. Yet again, I think racist and irrelevant sums up a lot of left-wingers, so...
Yelling at others about how taking my mask away is a violation of my rights.
Well, yes, taking somebody's mask away from them without their permission would violate their property rights, but forcing someone to wear a mask against their will violates the right to personal autonomy. See, it all goes back to the non-aggression principle. Suppose instead state governors are saying people aren't allowed to wear masks, and if you're caught with a mask in public, we'll confiscate it. I'd be equally against that.
Well, I remember back in the 1960s, it was the same thing around seatbelts. When Ralph Nader published Unsafe at Any Speed in 65, a friend of mine died because his car ran into the ditch. It was a low-speed accident, but the steering wheel went right through his chest.
I know this is somewhat tangential to the main point, but I believe that probably happened way before airbags were invented, because I know for a fact that a collision that creates enough force to push a steering wheel through a person's sternum and rib cage would probably create enough force to actually set off the airbags.
That was like in 1962. And, Ralph Nader came along and we came along and said, hey, how about seatbelts? And, oh my God, you can't do that. Motorcycle helmets, oh my God, it's tyranny.
Well, I would argue that mandatory seatbelts and motorcycle helmets aren't actually a violation of people's rights. Since the government does actually own the roads, they would have the right to create rules for them because of property rights. And if we did have anarcho-capitalism and all the roads were owned and maintained privately, chances are there would be similar safety rules in place. The reason these mask mandates are considered tyranny is because the government is trying to make rules for property they don't own. If you own a piece of property, you have every right to say nobody's allowed to come here unless they wear a mask, because it's your property, you get to set the rules. Now, if you tried saying nobody's allowed on Jason's property unless they wear a mask, and Jason is obligated to enforce that, which is essentially what the government is doing, that's illegitimate because you can only create rules for your own property, not other people's.
Incandescent light bulbs? It's the end of a way of life. The American dream is gone. Happy holidays? Oh, you must hate Jesus. It's the war on Christmas. How about getting rid of plastic straws? Oh, the Trump campaign is selling Trump logo straws, plastic straws.
That's actually pretty smart of Donald Trump to capitalize on liberal stupidity like that, but that generally is what happens when you ban things. That creates more demand for them. Like right before they were announcing they were going to ban incandescent light bulbs, what do you think one of the first things people did was? Rush to the store and buy as many of them as possible to stock up on them while they can. Same exact thing's going to happen if you ban plastic straws. More people are going to buy them before they're banned. And even after they're banned, there'll still be a black market for them for people who want to get a hold of this stuff. It's not like the demand goes away just because the supply goes away. And this is what I don't understand about the left when they argue against the war on drugs. When you hear liberal arguments against the war on drugs, they understand perfectly well why banning things doesn't work, but then they'll do a 180 and say ban guns, ban plastic straws, ban drinks over 30 ounces.
Because it's tyranny, don't you know? Plastic bags in grocery stores. I mean, it seems like every generation and then lately every year, conservatives have a new phony thing to get outraged about.
So what Thom is doing here is very intellectually disingenuous. He's taking a bunch of things that his opponents typically criticize and lumping them together, and basically trying to make it seem like these are things that conservatives hate because they're conservatives. Taking an intellectually honest, nuanced approach, we can see that these are actually different things that are controversial for different reasons. So seatbelts and motorcycle helmets being mandatory, there actually isn't any moral dilemma with those because the government legitimately owns the roads. The controversy there is the practicality of enforcement. There's so many cars and motorcycles on the road, how could you expect to monitor every single one of them constantly? I don't think people are mandating the use of Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, so I don't think that's really posing any moral issues either. Now, the rest of those are immoral because they're, as I've mentioned before, instances of the government making rules or decisions for property that they don't own. See, if I can't tell you what kind of light bulbs you can put in your house or what kind of bags you can serve at your store, where did government legitimately get that right from?
And in every single case, this is on one side public health or the environment, in the case of plastic straws and plastic bags.
This is a typical mentality of authoritarians. You're against my specific solution to this problem, so you must be apathetic toward the problem. What if the reason I'm against your solution isn't because I don't care about public health or the environment, but because I think I have a better way of dealing with these issues? What if I told you that forcing people to wear masks against their will is actually less likely to get people to wear them because they'll see them as a chore or something that's imposed onto them antagonistically rather than something that they're wearing for their health? Furthermore, people who are wearing masks for no other reason than they have to aren't likely to make sure that they're wearing them properly or replacing them or cleaning them out. So there's no guarantee that people being forced to wear masks means that anyone's going to be protected. You can argue about how effective masks are at slowing the spread of the virus all you want, but that doesn't necessarily mean that making them mandatory is a good idea.
On the one hand, public health of the environment. On the other hand, more profits for billionaires, for industry.
Well, that's a false dichotomy if I've ever seen one. Things that protect public health and the environment are often good for industry. Nobody likes being sick or living in a place that's dirty, so there are demand for environmental and public health services with or without government. Especially when you consider that efficient resource use is not just good for the environment, but good for the economy too. For example, the oil industry used to be a huge, heavy polluter, but when oil barons came along and discovered, hey, you can reuse the byproduct of the refining process and make more useful stuff out of it, the pollution produced by the oil industry went down significantly.
And the conservative outrage is always helping the billionaires. The bottle bill. I lived in Michigan when Michigan was the first state, this was in the 70s, to put a deposit on beer cans and pop bottles. And you would think the world was ending. I mean, there were just pitched battles around this that were, of course, being funded in part by, companies like presumably Coca-Cola, certainly the companies that were the bottlers, the companies that were selling and making the bottles. Oh, you're going to make us handle deposit money? You're going to add to our workload? Oh, that's tyranny.
Did those companies voluntarily agree to have this added to their workload? If the answer is no, then it is tyranny.
So now it's masks.
Well, Thom, it's probably easy for you to sit there in your studio and demand other people constantly wear masks in public just to get their goddamn groceries. I'm sure you can afford to order all your groceries. You don't have to actually wear face diapers 24/7. But there's people with asthma and different breathing conditions who basically had their rights to groceries revoked. Or what if you don't have any masks? You need a mask in order to go into the store and buy one. Okay, just order them online, sure. But suppose the shipping takes 2 to 3 days and I need to refill my heart pills tomorrow. See, this is how liberals and their fake generosity actually hurt people. You know what wouldn't be fake generosity, but genuine generosity? Supporting me on Patreon, link will be in the description. Until next time, this has been Philosophoss, making stupidity play dead. Have a good one.